You're listening to the Forest School podcast with Lewis Ames and Gemma Southerden.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
That is the T-shirt of 2020.
It is.
You're on mute.
But
Although
I
saw someone on Reddit saying that they had gone back to their first day in a full classroom and the only thing they missed was the mute all button.
Actually, that's the third time someone has told me about noise levels very specifically amongst all of the other, like, going back to school chat, both children and teachers that I've spoken to recently. And like within 30 seconds of that kind of chat starting, it's been like, yeah, the noise levels, yeah, just noisy. Interesting.
Do you think it's a customization? Do you think people, like, teachers are sort of used to it at a certain point and then... I don't know. I mean, unless you've not got kids in your house, like...
but having kids in your house is very different to having 30 of them in a classroom or a playground, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very
I mean, I've not suddenly had a quiet 12 months.
Well, no, you haven't, but that's your situation. But also for like those teachers who have carried on working, which is most people, and been in, or TAs, they've been in a school with like 8 kids instead of 30 and had like a entirely different like sensory experience for themselves and the kids, and then suddenly it's the same space with however many extra children have suddenly gone like, I
was reading a story, someone doing their NQT, and it was PGCE, and they're doing a placement, and they were in the classroom. So all the teachers are teaching virtually, but the teachers are in the classroom.
Yeah.
So there's no kids in this school, but they said they were sat sort of, what's the word? You know, like sort of not teaching, but like observing the lesson. But they were just observing the teacher in front of their laptop, and they couldn't sit behind the teacher in case it was distracting to see the other students. So they just had to sort of observe this teacher talking into the laptop for an hour, and that was their like lesson observation.
I didn't think of that.
They were like, I didn't know when to interrupt them or to talk, if I was supposed to talk to them during the breaks because they've had a stressful time and they didn't want to talk to, all these little niche scenarios that you don't really think about. Yeah.
Challenging circumstances, isn't it?
Oh, yes, mate. Well, challenging circumstances. We're going to try something different today, aren't we?
Yeah, and your challenging circumstance is that you have to talk to me, and I am really fidgety. And I did do some star jumps just now, but we've been doing lots of admin this morning, haven't we?
We've been doing admin for our Forest School leaders. So people who are thinking about being Forest School leaders, come to the training, because we spend absolutely ages thinking and talking about how we can do it better and what we're doing, and it's very draining.
Bespoke.
Oh yeah,
is the word.
Yeah.
Tailored, but does mean that after however long, because it's something you get out of practice doing, isn't it? Sitting down on your behind, talking to another person, and looking at a screen, and assessment specifications and all that kind of thing, and then you do it and you're like, oh, this is a bit different to being in the woods, isn't it? I might need to go and run around now. And you did use the words, okay, so that means you're going to be absolutely useless for admin within about 5 minutes because I started drumming and being disruptive.
I genuinely think people listening to this probably have the idea that, like, I am the sort of child and that you are slightly more for the most part on a level. You have a few horror stories from your childhood, but like it was just a very clear realization while we're doing this admin, and I was trying to fill out a spreadsheet and I was being a real grown-up, and then I looked over, and on the corner of Zoom was someone banging their pen on the side and going, but Lewis, what do you think of this? Do 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 do. I was just going, yes,
I know.
Thank you.
Can you imagine working with me like in an indoor environment on any kind of training course, any of that stuff? But I don't know. Yeah.
My challenge
is to talk to me.
So it's to talk to you, and I'm going to talk about the book Braiding Sweetgrass, and up to now we've tried to do sort of book reviews where both you and I have spoken to. Just what an absolute Right, she's holding doodles up of like. Okay, I'm not gonna gauge with it, guys. I'm not gonna gauge with it. She's got such a cheeky grin.
You can mute me, but you can't mute my video screen. Or maybe you can.
I probably can.
That would be better, wouldn't it? We can see each other. No, sorry, I am listening. I'm being very respectful listening. So not on the podcast, sometimes we read the same book, don't we? And then we chat about it. But this one, I haven't read it. Lewis has read it. And he's going to talk to me and I'm going to ask intelligent questions about it.
Applications for Forest School training are now open at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
So we're going to try out, see what it's like, because I imagine lots of people have listened to the other book reviews and gone, oh, I really want to ask them this. And it's hard for us to think of those questions when we've both read the book because we both know what's in it. So hopefully Gemma can slightly take the place of you guys listening and can fire things at me and I can go, I didn't really know. So,
and I know one fact.
Yes.
It's written by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I think in 2016 or even 2006. I can't quite remember.
2015 is the publishing date that I have. But it may even be older than that. So it's Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge and Teaching of Plants. So the big overarching metaphor is this braiding of 3 strands and of science, Indigenous wisdom, natural knowledge, and kind of going through this author's experiences and going, this area only wants to talk about the scientific, or this area only wants to talk about the Indigenous knowledge, and her kind of using it as a metaphor to go, actually, there's a lot to be learned from each other, and just like a braid, they are stronger when they all go together. So I think the thing that I got straight away, if anybody's thinking of listening to it, so I listened to it on Audible and it is read by the author and it is a slow read. It is a slow, a very like, I don't want to say respectful, but the tone of it is very, like the pace is very slow and like take your time over some stories and take your time over some ideas and really kind of chew them over. Which is really the book really benefits from it. The ideas in it couldn't be done quickly. I think it mirrors that idea that we've said in Forest School quite a lot, where you can't shortcut those experiences. You can't shortcut, how do you foster nature connection? Let's just do it in one afternoon and then all these teachers will be connected to nature, or let's do, it's almost like those experiences take a long time, and so do the stories that go along with them.
I get it. Can I interrupt? Can I say something that helps me put what you're saying into context? Like, who is she? Is she like an education person or a nature kind of communicator? Like, what is her role?
So that is a good question. So I'm just remembering now from the book, this might not be completely accurate, but she is a woman with Indigenous heritage. Mm-hmm. It's either her grandfather or her great-grandfather was in the schools where they took Indian children away from their families. And, she's in the book, she goes to schools where her grandfather's name is on the wall of like children who were re-educated here, in air quotes. She has followed a botany and it's like scientific route. So do PhD studies and things like that. And lots of it is talking about her experience of bringing lots of Indigenous and like nature connection knowledge to academic institutions and going, can we study this thing? There's lots of stories about this, or, we know that it grows in these kind of ways. And the academic society kind of going, no, we don't have any place for this. Right. And it's her kind of forging her own path. And again, I'm doing this with my hands. I'm doing that Platt thing of going, well, I can bring in a bit of the Indigenous stuff and they're not completely separate. So that's kind of who she is. And she then takes on students. And it's quite interesting. She takes on students across the the university that she's working at. So there's a really good story where she takes on some medical students and they have to do, I think it's either a botany or a natural, there's a module that's to do with kind of plants, and it would be going out and finding where these things grow or whatever. And she pushes to not just do it in a classroom. She pushes to like take them on a wilderness retreat.
Yeah.
And these doctors in training have this kind of self-sufficiency thing, and they learn about the honorable harvest, about giving back, and about the kind of cyclical nature and interconnectedness of everything, where specifically doctors, they enter into this experience very kind of it's a thing we have to tick off, it's a thing we have to, it's another unit, we've got another module. So it's sort of her teaching those students, and it's almost like you're a fly on the wall listening in on those stories and watching them, and you are also one of her students.
Right. That's a really fascinating idea, especially where doctors are concerned. We've talked about that on the podcast before with various people, haven't we, in terms of like natural medicine, and like a lot of the time when we're out of touch with nature, we completely forget that actually all of the remedies that we use, that we buy from the chemist, they are from nature originally, and that it wasn't actually that long ago that we were just finding them in the wild rather than going to the chemist. And now that seems so alien to us. So that's a really interesting idea, to actually take doctors into the wild when, as far as I know anyway, in the UK, that is not the case, and that your kind of medical stuff is all very much based on obviously the human body, but pharmaceutical kind of side and academic side. And as for kind of getting them to engage with where various remedies and things come from. And then that kind of ties in with all the research being done at the moment about nature connection for not just like well-being as in, it makes you a bit happier, but well-being as in this really, really drastically improves your chances of survival, from loads of conditions, having views of trees out of your window in hospital and all that kind of stuff. So it's almost like that stuff is growing, that awareness and that research is growing, isn't it, as a thing? Yeah.
And there's some good bits that I'm going to forget the name of the plants, but they're collecting something from a swamp. To identify these species, or I think there might be basket weaving with them or something. But their hands get all chapped and, cracked and from whatever else. And the plant that they're collecting, if you snap it, it releases like an aloe vera balm that is like perfect skin or sun. It's like perfect sunburn gel, and it's kind of, lots of the book is based around this kind of idea of, I've written down that it's lots of mental frameworks. So there are bits of the book that I think are great. There are bits of the book that I don't necessarily agree with, but I think what it is a way of viewing and almost anthropomorphizing, the Shintoism thing of, what was her name? The KonMari, and that kind of popularized recently, that Shinto thing of your socks will be happy if they are in this folded way, your table will be happy without food stains on it or whatever. And this idea that, like, whether you believe that or not, it's a useful framework. And so there's a lot of frameworks in here about the honorable harvest and how you relate to the plants and the trees. And that kind of framework of, so we started doing it in our session. We did the first one on Tuesday, didn't we? Where we just said thank you to a tree that had held up the hammocks by putting a load more wood chip on its roots that had been uncovered. And that kind of way of, like, whether you believe it or not, that is good for you. That is good for the environment that you're taking part, and it changes your relationship with the space, the way you view it, not just as a commodity, but as a reciprocal thing that you should or have to give back.
I have seen some criticism of that approach recently, which kind of like surprised me, because it's one of those things that at the moment, as you say, is quite in vogue, isn't it? And most people are like, oh yeah, this is great. But it was just people talking about trees, and lots of people recommending The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Verlaben. And then there was just one person going, I think there are better books that are more true and more factual and less anthropomorphizing. And this person was kind of saying that actually it's quite disrespectful to the tree to give it that, to anthropomorphize it and make it really like human centered. Like, these things only really have value if they have feelings that we can equate with our own. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, actually, this is yet another example of like this age that we're living in. So there are kind of criticisms to that, but it's like you say, it's kind of like a shortcut, isn't it? It's a kind of, maybe it would be more kind of just to not do that and to kind of go, I cannot ever comprehend the feelings of a tree. Why pretend to do that? And why imagine that it's got any feeling that is approximate to a human experience? But if it's a shortcut that results in a beneficial outcome, then really, is there any harm in it? That's an interesting moral question, isn't it?
Find out about CPD courses at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
Yeah, I've just finished, me and my wife have just finished binging The Good Place, the TV show. And that is about like heaven and hell and what do you do to get into the, anyway. But they have a thing where they say like, what we need to do is, they're trying to get everybody to be good. And they say, we need to change their actions first. They change the behavior and we change the intention afterwards.
Ooh.
Which is really like, as I was watching it, I was like, I don't know if I think that's a good idea, and their thing is like, if you can make it a habit, then it starts to, anyway. So there's, which is I think a good point then to talk about a bit that I disagree with. So this book is heavily North American centered because it is Native American. The wisdom is Native American wisdom. So there's lots of stuff about maple trees that I was kind of like, and the sap and all the ritual around, the syrup and the boiling and the wood and the, which kind of was a bit lost on me, having lived in the southwest of England. It's just not a thing I can relate to. And then there was a bit about the honourable hunt, which people who might be new to the podcast wouldn't know. So I'm vegan, and that kind of obviously sat in my head where I was like, okay, let's just go through all of this. Let's think about how does that work. And the example was a very prophetic story of somebody who goes out and he goes out with rifle, but he only goes out with one bullet. And so he goes out, and the deer that is a bit skittish and runs away, he doesn't even try and take a shot. And the deer that is standing in front of her young doesn't take a shot. And then he's like, and I was ready to go home, walking home, a deer walks out into the complete clearing. It stares me down for about 30 seconds while I take off the rifle, while I line it up, and while I pull the trigger. And was saying like that in this book, that's the honourable hunt, because that deer kind of gave itself knowingly. And
see, that I guess is the danger of the anthropomorphizing thing, isn't it? It's like projecting your feelings onto another species to kind of excuse yourself and excuse your actions, or
well, to give meaning to them, isn't it? I mean, that's what so much of the human experience is giving meaning to coincidences or interactions. In the same way that they were in the same way they were saying, if you go to take a blackberry and it looks like the best blackberry, but as you try and pull it, it doesn't immediately come off the branch, then that is the plant saying, I'm not ready. Or they talk about going to fell a tree because they're going to make a canoe, and they sort of ask the tree, and if the wind picks up or if like a branch falls, then they take that as a sign of, okay, we shouldn't take this tree, we should go and take another one. So that's what I kind of mean when I'm saying it's all frameworks. It's all how do you interpret the stuff around you? And some of that is going to come not at the expense of, but kind of, if you really need to hunt deer, you're going to find reasons to hunt deer. If you really need to fell a tree, I would be interested to know if people interpret the signals the same way. If you ask to cut a tree and the wind picks up, would there be some people that go, that's the wind starting its own leaning process? And some people will go, that's the wind saying no. You know where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I completely do. And again, I've read quite a lot of that recently. I've been reading some books which do advocate for like ask the tree before you cut the branch or whatever. And when I read it, I'm like, oh shit, the other day I didn't do that. I should really do that more. I haven't, it's not like completely embedded in my practice that I do it. But again, like why are you doing it? Can you actually ask the tree? If it is a shortcut to, I'm going to be more mindful of the way I harvest things, and I am going to be more observant of the thing I am harvesting, and therefore I may notice if that tree already looks a bit diseased, a bit weather beaten, a bit like it's not going to be able to handle my attack on it, and therefore I won't harvest that tree. It's actually got bugger all to do with asking the tree and listening to vibrations or signs in nature. But the result, actually it's about you, the human, being more observant and more thoughtful and mindful, instead of just going, oh, resources, just get all the resources, I need it, so I just get it. So yes, and people would, there'd be millions of, I guess, just among the forest school community, there would be a big divide amongst people who agree or disagree with that, in terms of like, I'm sure there'll be loads of people who go, yep, I absolutely can feel the tree giving me permission or not giving me permission. And people who go, no, it's just, or people who go, yeah, I do it. But actually, honestly, can I actually read any response from nature? Interesting one.
And this then, it is kind of interesting because that's one of the braids. So then bringing in the scientific thing and it's those things all sort of tying together.
Yeah.
But one of the things it did make me think about is a conversation you and I had a little while ago, where we were talking about a pathological demand avoidance as a condition isn't the right word, as a thing. And we were talking about how quite often it's seen as one of the struggles can be that people with PDA don't see authority anywhere. They would see the teacher as the same as themselves, as the same as the other children, as they just see all those things on a level playing field. And then I think you were saying that one of the sort of, not flip side, but like the extensions of that is that they also see a squirrel as important as their teacher, or they would see the willow tree as important as their best friend. Is that fair, or have I misinterpreted a conversation?
I think it would completely depend on the person. I think we were discussing a certain person at that time and saying how, I think I was relating a story of my own personal experience of a PDA, and I was I had observed that, he had, alongside a kind of level playing field of human
hierarchy,
along with that seemed to go with a more than your average person, level playing field of hierarchy of human v nature for this one person. Whether or not that is as a result of PDA or not, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? So I wouldn't make that sweeping statement for every PDA, but those two trends, I kind of noticed those at the same time with him. And that I just saw that, because obviously a lot of the time people kind of focus on PDA and how it may sort of present people with challenges or be viewed as a disability, whereas I just saw that as an amazing strength and something that was quite different to a person without PDA, and how that is a kind of just a real strength and something to really tap into, kind of a special interest that goes beyond a special interest, because actually you've got a completely different mindset. You've got the mindset that probably most forest school leaders would want all of the people that they work with to have, and to be like, well, everyone in this learning community is of an equal standing, not just leader children, but also the beings in this place. And it went beyond animals. It was trees, plants, whatever. So that consideration of feelings and needs went beyond the human, just instinctively, without having to think about it, without it being like a second thought.
Yeah. And I guess that's kind of what I was saying in terms of it being a framework of like, if everybody had that framework, whether they were born and instinctively had it, or whether the process of teaching and learning from people around you gave you that framework to see the world.
Yeah.
That to me is quite interesting. Just as a like, what would that do to all the interactions? How would, you know, if you really got down to a level playing field, how would all your interactions change? How would businesses operate? How would, you know, that's something that I think is really interesting.
Oh, completely. And don't you think, like, since beginning your forest school journey, our forest school journeys, that it's like a trajectory, isn't it? Where wherever you started from, the longer you work in forest school, the further down that road you go, so that you're more aware of the effects of your actions, to the point where you become more and more other to the rest of society, so that you do really question some people's choices, and you're like, yes, I understand that would make money, but just don't do it though, because the impact on the environment from doing that is too catastrophic. So, but
then I mean that's the difference though, isn't it? Because when you say to somebody who has a low nature connection, the impact of that in their mind, the impact is different to in your mind.
Of course. So the impact,
yeah. So the impact to them is like, okay, well, that field would flood, or okay, you know, it's a bit like you could probably take it too far and be that. But you know, in Star Wars, when because I'm real cool, when Anakin goes a bit mental and he goes to the temple and just kills all the other Jedi, and he kills all the like children in the temple and goes completely horrendous. And you know, light years away, Yoda is there and his heart hurts, and he's like, something's happened. There's been this mass thing. Like, I feel like that's sort of what forest school leaders would get if you saw a load of felled trees. Someone might look at it and be like, that's a shame, they've been growing a long time, and a forest school leader would be looking at it going, or someone with high nature connection would be like, oh, the mycelium, the all the billions of wood lice.
I know. You know. Yeah, I've had that today. I just went on a walk with the dog this morning, and there's a place down the road which is just like an old tumble down house, and someone's recently bought it, and there's a footpath going right next to it, which is obviously annoyed them. And you look at it first of all and you're like, oh, they've done a great landscaping job of like fencing off their land and putting the footpath around the edge and making the footpath really level, and it's not muddy anymore because they've used loads of chippings. But then I was walking along and I was like, but what have they done to the elder trees? Where are the flipping elder trees? And they're just like massacred and all just chucked down the hill. And I just, you know, and I haven't got anyone to talk to about that apart from you. How upsetting that is. And it's like, well, you know, I'm sure they were overgrowing the footpath. I'm sure it was a bit inconvenient. But the flipping elder trees, man, they were old. Like old. Anyway.
But there you go. That's it, isn't it?
Here, can I? This is a complete tangent, but can I talk to you about?
We don't allow tangents. I'm afraid this is a very serious podcast.
Okay, here's a dilemma for you. Would you engage in this or not? So on Facebook, local farmer has put a thing with a photo of some litter left in their field and gone, I saw some people picnicking in my field. I didn't say anything. It's on a footpath. We get a bad reputation for spoiling people's fun. However, they've left all this litter and now I have to clear it up. Crisp packets, drink bottles, etc. And everyone's like flooding in going, this is terrible, this is so awful, you shouldn't have to do that, that's terrible, poor you. And I felt the same. I didn't comment, but I was just like, oh yeah, that is really pants. And it is an increasing trend that people are like getting out into nature since lockdown, but trashing it, fine. But then today I was walking in that same place and there is loads of junk around left by farmers, which has been there for years and it's always there, like the kind of like bin bag type wrappings of silage bales, you know, like black bin bag kind of stuff. And it's just like matted into the soil and the hedges because it's been there for such a long time, like big kind of containers that have had like sheep feed in there or sheep dip stuff, just chucked, just left there. Definitely by the farmers, like it is, you know, sheep food for special blah, blah, blah. And it's in the same place and nobody flipping comments on that. Nobody. And so it just struck me. I was like, hang on a minute, this is a real like dichotomy here. You know, you actually own this land and you're trashing it, but it's got footpaths on it. So I was like, oh, do you know, in one way I would love to kind of take photographs of it and add it to this thread and go, oh, I've also noticed all of this litter around, which has been there for a long time. And I was like, oh, I guess the only way I could do it would be to go, I'm happy to volunteer my time to clear this up if anyone else wants to help. But I was just like, just don't. But
I suppose it depends, doesn't it? That's the difference between, is it an issue because it's damaging to wildlife, or is it an issue because the farmer perceives it as extra time? It's an extra job. Like the crisp packet on the footpath is an extra job because they can't do whatever. The stuff that they've intentionally left in a hedge isn't creating any more work for them. It's a very self-interested way of looking at litter. Anyway, sorry. So there's some really good metaphors in this book that I kind of wanted to share. So there's a massive paragraph about lichen and the relationships that lichen have, and in a way that I feel like this book, all the different chapters, the chapter on hunting, the chapter on maples, the chapter on lichen, you could go off and find a specific book. And in fact, I do want to. There's apparently an equivalent of The Secret Life of Trees, which is, it's up on my screen, Gathering Moss. And it's all about, and I really want to just go on that little tangent. But so talking about lichen in this book, and about, in that way of like a very prophetic teacher, kind of talking about lichen and very heavily leaning in and being like, like people. So it's kind of, lichens can't survive without each other, and some of them provide the framework and some of them provide the food, and they colonize places that people, otherwise animals and flora and fauna couldn't colonize because, and they're saying, interestingly, so it's, lichen is a fungi and a algae. Thank you. And it was saying that some lichen, the combinations will only exist together. So lichen A is always made up of fungi A and algae B, but that some of the algae will like pair when it wants to, but can also go off on its own and will pair with another fungi if it wants to. That can be a bit promiscuous. Yeah. And some of them will only form lichen when there's a scarcity of food or resources. So they will live completely separate lives until there's a scarcity, and then they form lichen.
Yeah, and so because they need the benefits of the other, because one uses photosynthesis, yes, to make food for the other, and the other creates the structure. So which is which? The algae uses photosynthesis, and the fungi creates the structure. Yeah. So I guess if the structure is missing in that environment, then that's when they would do that. Is that right?
It's just a very interesting kind of book. And then it's talking about, there's a big bit about animals being teachers, and stuff about, the big kind of lean on it is, the beaver has been around as an animal for far longer than humans have been evolved. So the idea that you would be near a beaver and go, I have nothing to learn from this animal. Like, as a species, we still have stuff to learn from these trees, from these animals, in terms of going, it's a bit like, do we need to keep reinventing the wheel? If there's something that can survive and is functional, then why are we not, we should be looking at those things all the time to go, oh, it's symbiotic relationships. Oh, it's, which I thought was really interesting. And then obviously it talks about trees being carers for humans, and I think I've talked to you before about this, like this idea that like trees are essentially farming humans.
Oh yeah,
because they give us the air, they provide houses for us. When we die, we turn into food for more trees. But there's something about recently, and it was kind of highlighted when I was reading this book, that my mental frame for time has moved the longer I spent around trees. So I think inherently I'm quite I'm like a proactive person, and I want to like do things, go for it. I'll just do it. I'll just get on with it. I'm not
sure I agree with that, Lewis.
my detriment and to the detriment of every relationship I've ever had, I just want to do everything straight away. I have an idea. Yeah, there's no, but I think being around trees has helped because, and someone was put in a forest school group on Facebook the other day that, they started with had to clear cut some wood or had to have a load of felling because of, it might have been ash dieback, it might have been something else. And it turned out that it was like 4 trees in a 6-acre woodland or something. I was like, okay, well, it's not that much. But my immediate thought was like being felled particularly to a coppice tree, but it's just so nothingy to the lifespan of a tree. It's just so like, oh right, yeah, I was cut down for 10 years. In that 300-year span. It's the equivalent of us being like, yeah, there was a stone in my shoe for a bit. And so that just kind of, that's the framework that kind of alleviates maybe it makes me feel a bit less like I've got to have that guilt thing of like, I'm not going to chain myself to a motorway. I know those things are important. And there's a lot of things that once they're lost, we're not going to get them back for 1,000 years. But that's only important if you think in human timeframes.
Weirdly enough, I was listening to In Our Time last night when I couldn't sleep, and they were talking about the Devonian age mass extinction. Oh my God, it's just mind-boggling. In the same way, it's like, there have been 4 mass extinctions. This one, this many billion years ago. This one, the other zillion years ago. And that just made me go, in a similar kind of way, just go, oh, well, Extinction Rebellion, we are, like, everything's going extinct, but it's happened before. And I'm sure that's what, like, climate change deniers say, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it does give you that sense of, like, you think that your time on Earth is the most important time and the only time and must be the way that it should be. And actually, planet Earth is like, well, what else? There's
a one of those logical fallacies that goes around, which is called the high point of history, which is if you look at writings from any period of time, they all think they are at the height of technology and civilization. Even like the Babylonians, they're like, no one is going to surpass this. This is like the height of what we're doing. Like the Romans and everybody just writes it of like, don't know if you know, but we're wiping our ass with sponges. Like no one's topping this shit, literally. So it's that kind of thing of like, it's just a framework. It's the way, and sometimes frameworks are useful to have all the time, and sometimes they're useful to go, okay, what if I see it through this lens? What if I take this on? The last thing that I want to say was that this book has got so much ceremony in it, so much kind of talk about ceremony and the importance of it and how beneficial it is for communities. A lot of it echoing the stuff we talked about with Jenny Archer about it. So just this idea that it made me quite interested because, again, it's quite North American and, let's say, Native American centered. And so some of those I was like, oh, those can relate. And some of them I was going, well, that sounds really important. Like it's really like a really beneficial thing to do. But can you just lift that up and go, that sounds really good as a framework. I'm going to put that ceremony here in the middle of Devon. Yeah.
I know. And we've said that about forest school in general before in terms of like, can you just lift up something from Scandinavia and go, we're just going to do that, basically. Do the same as they've done without the cultural history and awareness and, general lifestyle of the people. Yeah, I know. And cultural appropriation as well. Do you have the right to go, I read about it in a book written by a lady who did have First People heritage, and then just go, we're going to do that because it sounds nice in Devon. Yeah.
Well, I suppose with lots of these things, it's kind of, again, it comes back to, with a lot of this book, is it about the behavior or is it about the intention? Is it more important, is it more important that you get lots of children to have a ceremony where they cover all the roots of the trees that have been eroded over the last year? because that has benefit to the woodland? Or is it more important that you have like a solid gold intention, even if no wood chip gets laid, that there's an intentional change?
Or looking at it more from a kind of child-led or playwork perspective, do you go, it's not my place to impose any of those thoughts and ideas on the learners? If they express a wish to do that, then that's up to them, and it's not my place to kind of impose, you know, any kind of ceremony of gratitude upon them, which we did it the other day, didn't we? But the way that you phrased it was, I'm going to do this. I've made a list of the things that I've been given today. I've made a list of the things that have, you know, made me feel grateful. So I'm going to do this if anyone wants to join in. Therefore, that wasn't lifted from somewhere else and imposed upon anyone. That was just you saying a thing out loud, and some people engaged with it and got a lot out of it. So, yeah. But do you think you would have, because we have talked about that before, you know, for years, haven't we? We've been talking about reflection in our sessions and what the best way to facilitate that is, and that line of like, if you know something is going to be beneficial for a group, but it feels a little bit like trying to, not steamroller, but like push to get it to happen. Push something uphill, yeah, just slightly. Where is the balance there? Do you think that reading this book made you push that stone up the hill a bit more than you normally would?
Do I think it made me push it? I think it's a book that changes the viewpoint and the understanding of the reader, but and this kind of goes back to what I was saying at the start of it being a very slow book. I don't think that I could lift anything out of the book and go, right, I'm going to do that with my group, or I'm going to tell my group that story, or I'm going to teach them that thing, because it's stuff that needs to happen over a long time. And so if you want to, because this book is, well, let me just have a, so it's something like I can't try and find how long it is. It's something like 16 hours long, right? This book, which is, for an audiobook, massive. I think like one of the Lord of the Rings books is only 20 something hours. And so 16 hours, it's basically 16 hours of semi-mindfulness. And, you know, so I don't know, I'm sort of waffling around your question. From
my observation as you were reading it, because it's something, that whole like gratitude and reflection thing is something we talk about probably on a fortnightly to monthly basis anyway. And it feels like since you started reading the book, you've brought it up more often. You've said, I really want to, you know, focus on this gratitude thing more. I really want to find a way to make this work. And then I think the way that it happened last week anyway, you know, this week, I mean, next week is another whole universe, isn't it? But, this week it really worked. But and so I wonder whether it's helped, the book has somehow helped you focus on it as a thing that you think is important and get to an answer about how, like one idea about how it could be facilitated. So, because I remember when you read it, you told me about the ceremony, and is it called like a Thanksgiving ceremony? But not
the Thanksgiving address.
So not as in Thanksgiving.
I'll explain what that is for people that have. So the Thanksgiving address is in the, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, Potawatomi nation, which is one of the independent nations inside of the United States. It's a indigenous nation, and where American schools have the Pledge of Allegiance, these schools have the Thanksgiving address, which is one of those things that has apparently a very long history, and it is naming all the things that we're thankful for that exist. So it's thanking the medicine plants for healing us. It's thanking the trees for giving us shelter and shade. It's thanking the fish for giving us food and their bodies. And each sort of paragraph ends with, and now our minds are one. So it's this idea of kind of reconnecting and going, okay, we're not complete, again, that level playing field, we're not completely separate. We're linking these things together. Obviously there were bits of it that I was like, I'm not sure that I agree with this whole giving us your body thing. But they were saying that it's like age and stage appropriate. So kindergartners might only do 2 or 3 paragraphs or word it differently. And I was like, I really like that. Maybe that's what we should do.
Yeah. You can find it, by the way, if you Google it, Thanksgiving address, then you can have a look. It makes nice reading. And I think, I remember you saying like, maybe we should do it or write it somewhere or whatever. But can you, don't know.
It's a lot. And that's something that we've talked about with stuff like this that is slow and purposeful and very intentional, very I'm going to use the word intentional, and it always is an interesting challenge to me to take something like this that is slow, meditative, and to go, how could I do this with a group of children who are mixed aged, who have neurodiversity, out the wazoo, that sitting down and doing a Thanksgiving address is not appropriate for most of them, no matter how you slice it, or, giving a speech about how we need to be good to the trees, or, just that stuff doesn't translate.
Yeah, and I think probably like there will be some forest school practitioners who will feel like they want to do stuff like that, and it is part of their practice. But personally, I think that doing things like that is like it's too much of an imposition.
Imposition is a good word.
It's like, I think this is important, so I'm going to make you all do it, or make you all listen to me, or whatever. If you go back to look after yourself, look after the people, look after the forest, like, I guess you could argue that it comes under look after the forest, but it's not a necessary, you don't need to do it for safety reasons or, any of those kind of things. So I think it's fine to go, I'm going to do this. If you want to stick around and listen or be part of it, then that's completely fine. And I think that's really interesting, in the same way as like being open about other things that we do as adults that we see as having value. Just adds to a child or young person's kind of experience of the world and the richness of the world. And, I know one person who goes to church every Sunday, and I know this other person who thinks that this is a really important ceremony to conduct or whatever. But kind of like forcing a group to take part in it, I kind of feel like, from my practice perspective, is.
Do you think we strive for a maximum impact in terms of nature connection or community building with the lowest possible intrusion?
Yeah, I think so.
Intrusion is the word, isn't it? Because and that sits on a scale. Imposition, because to a lot of children, any interruption to their time at forest school is like time away from what they really need, or from what they're really interested in. And so you might go, building a relationship with these trees is like so important that it's worth making person X frustrated for 5 minutes if it means we can go through this kind of ceremony. Or you might go, do you know what, we probably get 80% of the impact if we did it in 30 seconds. Or how can I, and we've all done that as teachers, when you go, how do I do, like, if you're on a holiday club and you've got some new kids and you suddenly realize you've actually got quite a lot of stuff you need to tell them, like where the loos are, what the boundaries are, whatever else. But you've got some people that have been there for ages, and you have to go, how can I do this in the least intrusive way? How can I get the information in the least intrusive way? And I think this book is not in any way trying to not be intrusive.
Yeah.
It's going, this information is paramount, no matter how slow the story is, no matter how... none of it's tedious. It is all enjoyable listening, but it's not there with any intention of like direct action or, influencing you quickly so that you make a change after chapter 1,
Right. Yeah.
But I genuinely would recommend it to all forest school leaders. Give yourself like 3 months to kind of put on a chapter every now and again and go through it and kind of go, oh, I've got a different, you probably go, oh, I've got a different sort of thought about maple leaves now, or like, oh, kind of, next week it might be, oh, I've got a different viewpoint on lichen or something, it'll drip feed, and each of the chapters is important and change inducing, I should say.
Nice.
Is there anything that you have gone, I'm going to, like you're an interview guest now. Is there anything that you've gone, you didn't talk about, or anything that I've talked to you about in person that you've gone, you didn't mention that thing?
Probably, but not that I can remember right now. So you talked about Gathering Moss as being like a book that you might want to read as a follow-up. Was there anything else that it kind of sparked something in you and you went, oh, I really want to find out more about that?
Well, I'll tell you, it made me want to learn a little bit more about wild food in the UK, and not in a... So we've just done an episode about foraging, and I think what I wanted to do was like something slightly different to foraging in that. So there's a story in this book that I'll paraphrase, which is the land of the maple trees. And in the when it was first made, the sugar used to just drip off the leaves. And so the people who lived in that nation, because it's like the maple tree. So I'm going off on tangents, but there's this idea that you could draw a map of any geographical location by tree species, particularly in America. So then you would have, aside from the state borders and the national borders, the maple tree nation, and then the beechwood nation, and that those trees influence those communities more so than anything else. The river nations, because that is what influences community, or has done for a long time. So saying that the people that live in the maple tree nation, when it used to drip off the leaves, they became lazy, and they just used to lie down under the trees with their mouths open, getting fat from the sugar. And so I'm forgetting the name of the deities. Anyway,
the deity
or deities, then trapped it inside the trees and condensed, and then separated it out among the sap, so that the humans had to do some work which stopped them getting lazy. So it was like this thing of, then every year when it's maple season, the work that we have to put in reminds us to not be lazy, and to kind of, so, and I feel like there's the two levels of foraging. So there's this level of foraging that's like, you can pick wild garlic and you can shove it straight in your face hole. But
that was me last night. Oh,
wild garlic is good. But I want to find out about some more things that kind of require a bit of processing. So like we've done some tree tapping. I want to find out there's other things that are kind of almost where I'm pulling my weight with the natural food that's available.
I know what you mean. There's those processes that when you stop to think about it, you're like, whoa, my ancestors at some point worked out that if you like collected this seed and then you dried it out and then you took the husks off and then you pounded it out and then you mixed it with water and then then you added some water and left it to sprout, and then you did that but you kept it wet but not too wet, and then you fermented it in a barrel. It tasted real good. And you're like, what the heckins, like how did that process, like how was it discovered, how? And then I like that idea of engaging with something a bit longer,
and and it's like doing something. It's almost like a partnership of like the plant has made the thing and I have made, and I do the process, and then, we've made something together. It's like, then it's a collaborative process.
Well, yes, I do know what you mean. Would making oak gall ink satisfy that urge in you? Because that is one of those processes where you're like, bloody hell, for hundreds of years, that was ink. Like that's how you made ink. If you want to write something, that's what you had to do in this country, and that's what we did. And all those like amazing manuscripts with the illuminated letters, they're all written with oak gall. Like,
okay, will you teach me?
Well, I've never done it, so yes, I will learn, and then we'll do it.
It makes me think about, I saw a good tweet the other day that was like, I can't believe the process people had to go with mushrooms. Like at some point, people just had to go, well, Brian's dead, so I guess we don't eat that one.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
I want to do something that's collaborative. I think that's one of the frameworks that changed, is I have a real desire to do things collaboratively with the natural world. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm looking forward to learning more about that sort of stuff.
Support the podcast today by becoming a Patreon member at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
You're going to try and talk to me about a book next time.
Well, do you know what? I don't think I am. I'm going to tell everyone to read it right now. The Book of Trespass by Nick Majobi. I'm just
sorry, I've
now.
put you on the spot there.
No, I'm glad you did, because Nick Hayes. It's really bloody good. And as I was reading it, I was like, is this relevant for a school? Could there be a podcast in here? And as I was reading it, I was like, yeah, definitely. And then I finished it, and then I couldn't really remember the bits that were relevant for a school, apart from like one kind of element. So I'm just going to recommend it as if you are a person who works outside in the UK, because I think it is quite UK specific.
Oh, definitely.
Then give it a listen. It'll probably, if you're anything like me, make you quite angry. And I think that's kind of the point, because it went alongside the kind of campaign from him about like open access to land. So it's all about land ownership in the UK and the history of that. And actually, it does go beyond the UK.
A lot of it's America based. Because it's that kind of idea that our law structure was obviously taken with the settlers to America, and and he does go to camps in Calais at one point as well. But it's like brilliantly written. It's amazing, and has got quite a lot of like Old English law in it, as in LORE, as well as LAW, in terms of like laws of access and enclosure and agriculture and loads of stuff that I'm kind of interested in from a social history point of view, and talks about our relationship with the land having changed. It does talk about enclosures in, I think they begin in the 1700s, but then kind of 1800s is when the land was literally like mapped out, delineated. The commons, it's all about the commons. Oh my God, just read it, it's so good. And only a few hundred years ago, we would have had access to common land, and lots of us, especially in the lower socioeconomic brackets, would have really relied on that. And we'd been gathering our firewood there and our food and partying there. And then he kind of describes how, since that land was all carved up and hedged and owned by private people, how we kind of are searching for that same kind of fix by going out and doing foraging, by having festivals. Like, he really goes to town on Wilderness Festival, about how it's sort of like its ancestors as a festival. Its ancestor was kind of like a free gathering of just loads of people on this common land having a massive knees up, and it kind of got out of control, and then the authorities got a bit scared, so they cancelled it. And now if you want to go to Wilderness Festival, which I think may be in the same place or nearby, you have to pay however many £100 for a ticket, and you'll probably bump into David Cameron and all this kind of stuff. It's really cool. I bought one of he was selling some prints quite cheaply. He's an artist, and one of them, I bought a print, and it says on it, what's it called? It's like something about, it's a crime to steal a goose, but it's a bigger crime to steal the land from the goose or something. I've massacred that, haven't I? I'll find it. Anyway. Well, for people listening, that last 10 minutes was Gemma not telling me about a book she's absolutely not going to tell me about.
There you go.
I'm not going to tell you about the book. Here's 10 minutes about the book.
It wasn't 10 minutes. That was like 2.5 minutes. That's basically all I've got to say.
Well, there we go.
Here we go. Who steals the common from the goose? No, I've lost it again.
Okay. Well, to save me a lot of editing, we'll leave it there.
Stop there.
Right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
If you like this podcast and and want to support more episodes, you can donate through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Children of the Forest to show your support for the Forest School podcast.